Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of like total precision. It's almost like engineering.
Oh, absolutely. It's very cut and dry.
Right, like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the illuminated film and says, well, there it is, broken.
Yeah, and it's comforting, because it's binary. The human brain completely craves that sort of visible, undeniable categorization. We really want a clear line between healthy and unhealthy, or right and wrong.
But then you step into the world of human morality. You step into this realm of societal expectations of marriage, of the rigid structures of the law.
And suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Exactly. Completely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape today that is, frankly, it's murky, it's confusing, and it's a little terrifying.
Because human systems, they are rarely actually designed to handle the real complexities of human beings.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are fully immersing ourselves in Leo Tolstoy's play, Redemption, which, by the way, he actually originally titled, rather cheerfully, I might add, The Living Corpse.
Always a fun title to put on a marquee, right?
Oh, yeah, really draws a crowd. But we are tracing this profound, often really uncomfortable collision between human morality and the cold, unfeeling machinery of the administrative systems we build to govern ourselves.
And we've got some incredible source material for this. We spent time with two really remarkable adaptations of this work.
Right, so we have a classic English radio broadcast from the Great Plays series, and then this incredibly visceral Arabic language radio dramatization of the exact same play, which is called CEC.
And putting these two adaptations side by side, it really gives us this stereoscopic view of a man who is just entirely crushed by his own conscience.
It's a deep exploration of truth, for sure, but not, a comfortable platitudinous truth.
No, not at all. It's about what happens when the very messy reality of grace, guilt, and sacrifice runs headfirst into a legal system that, well, it only understands checkboxes.
Okay, so let's start with a thought experiment for you, the listener. I want you to imagine feeling so trapped by the moralistic rules of your society and so consumed by your own perceived inadequacies that the only honest, authentic thing left for you to do is to completely erase yourself.
To literally fake your own death.
Yeah. Not to escape a crime, but to escape the hypocrisy of living.
And to really understand this specific flavor of existential dread. You can't just look at the character on the page. You have to look at the mind that built him.
Because the philosophical architecture of this play is completely intertwined with Leo Tolstoy's own spiritual crisis, right?
Absolutely. Tolstoy didn't just sit in a comfortable armchair and theorize about society. The trajectory of his actual life is wild.
He spends his early years writing these massive, sweeping novels that literally everyone knows, War and Peace and a Karenina.
He becomes this massive global literary icon. But later in life, he makes this hard pivot to drama.
And he doesn't do it to entertain the masses.
No, he does it because he becomes absolutely obsessed with tearing down the illusions of civilized society. The adaptations describe him as being on this relentless pursuit of the plain, unvarnished, brutal truth.
And brutal is definitely the right word. When we say Tolstoy experienced a spiritual awakening, we aren't talking about, a peaceful meditation retreat.
Far from it. We are talking about a series of severe, traumatic, real-world shocks that systematically shattered his worldview. He developed this absolute allergy to societal lies.
Right, it wasn't abstract philosophy for him, it was lived trauma. Let's unpack those moments because they perfectly set the stage for the psychology of our protagonist in the play.
We have to start with the frozen coachman. This is a crucial story.
Yeah, so this is from when Tolstoy was just 19 years old. He's an aristocrat living the high life. He spends this glorious, endless evening feasting, drinking, and dancing at a magnificently warm, brightly lit ball.
The absolute pinnacle of Russian high society. He is surrounded by beauty, wealth, culture, you name it.
And then the party ends. He leaves the ball, still wrapped in the glow of the evening, and he steps out into the freezing Russian night. And there, waiting for him, he finds his peasant coachman.
The man has literally been waiting in the bitter cold for hours while Tolstoy danced.
And he was practically frozen to death.
And the cognitive dissonance of that moment is just staggering. You have the warmth, the excess, the supposedly elevated culture of the aristocracy inside, and literally inches away, separated only by a door, the human beings making that life possible are freezing in the dark.
For a thoughtful 19-year-old, that isn't just sad. It is a complete indictment of the entire social order.
It was his first real, undeniable encounter with the grotesque injustice of human hierarchy.
He suddenly realizes that his beautiful life is subsidized by blood and ice, and he just couldn't unsee it.
No, you can't unsee something like that. And then a few years later, he serves as an artilleryman in the Crimean War. He is thrust into the siege of Sevastopol, which was essentially just a meat grinder.
Right, and what does he witness there? The sheer mechanization of death?
But it wasn't just the physical violence that repulsed him. It was the philosophical and theological hypocrisy layered right on top of it. He is watching Christians slaughter other Christians.
While priests on both sides are literally blessing the cannons.
Precisely. The part that caused this deep, lasting revulsion in Tolstoy was that both warring empires were claiming God's absolute endorsement for the slaughter.
It was the ultimate hypocrisy.
It really was.
Yeah.
The highest spiritual ideal, the teachings of Christ, which are fundamentally about love and turning the other cheek, was being weaponized to justify the lowest, most depraved human action: murder.
So he's seeing the hypocrisy of class and the hypocrisy of religion and war, but then there's the law. The adaptations specifically mention his time in Paris, where he witnessed a public execution.
He watched a man get his head chopped off by a guillotine.
And a public execution is a very specific type of violence. It is premeditated, administrative, and totally clinical.
For Tolstoy, seeing the state enact murder under the guise of justice sparked a complete revulsion toward the entire concept of human law.
He didn't see the legal system as a purveyor of fairness or order anymore.
No, he saw it as an instrument of institutional violence. He basically realized that a judge in a courtroom doing paperwork can be just as brutal as a soldier with a bayonet. The judge just hides behind a desk and calls it civilization.
Wow. It's almost like he just kept pulling the thread on the sweater of polite society, and the whole thing just completely unraveled in his hand.
Yet it got to the point where he couldn't even stand the hypocrisy of his own wealth. He famously tried to abandon his estate and live as a peasant, seeking this simple, holy fate.
But what I find most fascinating about Tolstoy is his ruthless self-awareness, because he later actually critiqued his own attempt to play the peasant.
Right. He called his own lifestyle shift a purely selfish and superstitious search for personal security.
That level of introspection is so rare. He's essentially saying, even my attempt to escape the lie was a performance.
He absolutely refused to spare himself from the brutal truth. If his own actions were a pantomime of humility, he called himself out. He reached a point where he simply could not accept any narrative from society or from himself that wasn't fundamentally authentic.
I was thinking about this, and the best modern analogy I can come up with is the concept of doom scrolling.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, when you just consume tragedy after tragedy, injustice after injustice on your phone until you enter this state of hyper-empathy and existential dread.
Yeah, and it creates this profound paralysis.
Exactly. Once you see all the structural failures of the world, going about your normal day just feels completely absurd. It feels like Tolstoy was doing a 19th century lived-in version of doom scrolling.
He really was experiencing a heightened state of existential empathy. Once you truly see that the societal system is broken, that it runs on the frozen bodies of the poor, the blood of soldiers, and the state-sanctioned violence of the guillotine, participating in that system feels like a total lie.
You can't just put on a tuxedo and go back to the ball.
You really can't. And this uncompromising, paralyzing demand for truth is exactly the spiritual burden he places on the shoulders of the protagonist of our play, Fedor Protosov.
Which brings us to the core tragedy of the story, because, Fedor isn't Tolstoy.
No, he's not a great philosopher or a hardened social critic.
He is just an ordinary guy who is being absolutely crushed by the gap between his ideals and his reality.
Fedor is a brilliant psychological case study. When we meet him, or rather, hear about him in the opening of the story, we learn he is a former bank director. He is married to a beautiful, entirely respectable woman named Lisa. They have a child.
By every metric of 19th century Russian society, he has won the game. He has everything that is supposed to make a man happy.
But he has abandoned it all. He has walked away from his highly respectable life, and he is living in the slums with a band of Roma gypsies, just drinking himself into oblivion and listening to their music.
And the original Broadway producer of this play, Arthur Hopkins, is quoted saying something really profound about this character. He said, "Fedor is in all of us."
Fedor is in all of us. I mean, it sounds like an exaggeration until you look at the fundamental mechanism of Fedor's crisis. He summarizes his entire life's tragedy in one agonizing, beautiful line. He says, There has always been so much lacking between what I felt and what I could do.
Between what I felt and what I could do, that just, that hits so hard.
It is the human condition completely distilled into a single sentence.
It's the paralysis of wanting to be good, wanting to be ideal, but finding yourself entirely incapable of executing it in your daily life. You have the blueprint for a perfect life in your head, but every time you try to build it, your hands shake and the building collapses.
But we have to ask, what specifically triggers this collapse for Fedor? Why does he blow up a perfect marriage?
The Arabic language dramatization does a magnificent job of laying down the psychological groundwork here, focusing heavily on the intense, corrosive jealousy Fedor harbors.
You see, Lisa had a history before she married Fedor. She was deeply in love with Fedor's close friend, Viktor Karenin.
And Viktor is basically the anti-Fedor.
He really is. He is steady. He is a chamberlain of the imperial court. He doesn't drink. He is entirely proper and respectable. He is the guy who just does everything right.
And Fedor is acutely aware that Viktor still holds a torch for Lisa, and that Lisa, on some level, still respects and cares for Viktor. There's this incredibly tense, quiet scene where Fedor confronts Lisa about her continued interest in Viktor.
But the real breaking point is tangible. Fedor actually finds old love letters that Viktor wrote to Lisa long ago.
The letters. The adaptation quotes them directly. Viktor is calling her my beautiful sweetheart, my wild little filly.
Now, you have to put yourself in the mind of a man who already feels like he is failing to live up to his own ideals. He reads these letters, and the jealousy he feels isn't just a normal passing insecurity.
No, it metastasizes into a full-blown existential obsession.
He becomes utterly convinced that he is fundamentally unworthy of his wife. He looks at Lisa, who has preserved these letters, and he looks at Viktor, who is pure and morally upright. And Fedor realizes that he is the dark cloud standing in the way of a perfect, idealized love story.
He feels like an imposter in his own home, and this leads to what I think is one of the most depressing yet poetic explanations of a failed relationship I have ever encountered. Let's call it the flat champagne theory.
The flat champagne theory. It is a brilliant metaphor. So Fedor is sitting in a dive bar explaining to an artist why he intentionally ruined his life. He readily admits that Lisa is an ideal woman. She is practically flawless.
But he says that being married to her was like pouring champagne into a glass but getting no fizz.
No sparkle. No iridescent bubbles.
Yeah.
Just flat, dead liquid. He describes his days with her as being flat and stale and gray as the devil.
It's such a visceral image. Because champagne without the bubbles isn't just water, it's ruined wine.
Right. It is something that inherently should be celebratory and alive, but it's dead.
He had everything on paper, the wife, the job, the kid, but he felt absolutely nothing. And the worst part is, because she was so perfect, he knew he should feel something.
And that failure to feel what he was supposed to feel birthed a guilt that started just eating him alive from the inside out.
Which brings us to the psychological masterpiece of this play. Because that guilt ferments into something incredibly dark.
Fedor tries to explain to the artist why he fell in love with Masha, the young Roma singer he ran away with, and why he grew to actually hate his perfect wife. He articulates this devastating philosophy. We love people for the good we do them, and we hate them for the harm.
I literally had to rewind the audio when I first heard that line. We hate them for the harm. It feels entirely backward to how we normally conceptualize resentment.
Usually, we think we hate the people who harm us.
But Fedor is positing the exact opposite. He is saying we hate the people we harm.
This is Tolstoy digging into the deepest, ugliest roots of the human ego. Think about the mechanics of what Fedor is describing. Every time he came home drunk, every time he gambled away their money, he was wronging Lisa.
And Lisa, being the ideal, long-suffering wife, likely bore it nobly. She probably forgave him, or at least suffered in dignified silence.
But her very goodness, her purity, became a mirror that only reflected his depravity. Every single time he looked at her face, he saw his own failure staring back at him.
It makes complete psychological sense. If you hurt a bad person, you can rationalize it, you can tell yourself they deserved it. But if you repeatedly, needlessly hurt a genuinely good person, the illusion drops.
You are undeniably the villain of the story. And the human ego is fragile. It cannot sustain being the villain.
So what does mind do? To protect itself, it starts to resent the victim. Fedor hates Lisa because her suffering is undeniable proof that he is a monster.
And look at the contrast with Masha. Why does he love this Roma singer? It isn't just an affair of physical attraction. He explicitly states, the reason why I love Masha is because I did her good, not harm.
He goes to the Roma camp, he brings the money, he genuinely listens to her music and appreciates her art.
He feels that his presence brings her joy. With Masha, he gets to experience himself as a benefactor. He gets to be the hero.
Let's ground this for you, the listener, because while Fedor takes it to an extreme, the core emotion here is incredibly common. Have you ever borrowed money from a friend?
Or maybe you owed someone a really massive, difficult apology for something you knew was entirely your fault.
And you just kept putting it off. And because you felt so deeply guilty every single time you thought of them, you just started avoiding them. You wouldn't text back. You'd cross the street if you saw them.
And then, bizarrely, your brain did a flip, and you actually started to feel annoyed by them. You started thinking, why are they making me feel so guilty? Why are they so demanding?
That is classic cognitive dissonance. Your brain is trying to resolve the conflict between I am a good person and I am doing a bad thing to my friend.
And often the easiest way to resolve it is to subconsciously convince yourself that your friend somehow deserves the avoidance.
Exactly. Fedor's philosophy takes this everyday human avoidance tactic, dodging a friend because we feel guilty about how we treated them, and scales it up to life-destroying proportions.
He didn't just dodge a text message. He abandoned his marriage, his career, and his entire social class just to avoid the agonizing guilt of his own behavior.
So Fedor is trapped. The guilt of this flat champagne marriage has driven him to the margins of society. He knows he is the dark shadow blocking Lisa and Victor's happiness. He wants out, and he genuinely wants them to be happy together.
So naturally, in today's world, you just sit down, sign some papers, and file for divorce.
Right. It should be an administrative transaction. Victor wants to marry Lisa. Lisa is willing to marry Victor. Fedor wants to step aside. It's clean break.
It should be. But this is where Tolstoy shifts his focus from internal psychology to systemic critique. Because in 19th century Imperial Russia, stepping away from a marriage wasn't a private choice. It was a matter of state and church.
We really have to understand what marriage meant in this context. It wasn't a civil contract. It was a holy sacrament overseen entirely by the Orthodox Church.
And the church doesn't care about your flash champagne. The church doesn't care that your vibes are off.
Not at all. The institution does not care about human happiness, spiritual truth, or amicable separations.
To dissolve the Holy Sacrament, the system required a grave sin. The law required a villain. Specifically, to get a divorce, Fedor is informed that he must provide undeniable evidence of adultery.
And it wasn't enough to just say, yeah, I cheated. The legal system required a highly performative theatrical lie. The adaptations detail what this entails. Fedor would have to enact what is described as a degrading comedy.
It was a widely known corrupt practice of the time. Because the courts needed physical proof, gentlemen seeking divorce would literally have to hire sex workers from the streets, rent a hotel room, and stage a scene so that prearranged witnesses could catch them in the act and report back to the judge.
It was an open secret, a pantomime everyone knew was fake, but the bureaucracy demanded it to check their boxes.
And here is the ultimate paradox of Fedor Protosov. Here is a man who is a drunkard, a man who has squandered his wealth, a man who admits he is a complete failure, who couldn't live up to any of his own moral ideals.
Yet, when faced with this bureaucratic requirement, he suddenly draws an absolute unshakable philosophical line in the sand. He flat out refuses to lie.
It is his defining moment of moral clarity. He looks at his lawyer, he looks at the system, and he essentially says, I am a terrible husband, I have ruined my life, but I will not participate in your degrading comedy.
I will not profane my own soul and the sanctity of the truth just to satisfy a clerk's paperwork.
It's fascinating. He is entirely willing to destroy his life, but he absolutely will not fill out a fake form.
His commitment to the truth is so absolute that it leaves him with only one logical conclusion. If he cannot divorce Lisa legally, and he cannot return to her morally, the only way to remove himself as the obstacle without lying to the state is to literally cease to exist.
He decides he must commit suicide. He determines that physical death is the only honest way out of a dishonest system.
But there's a problem.
He lacks the nerve.
The English broadcast features this incredibly pathetic, agonizing scene. Fedor is alone, he has the revolver pressed against his temple, and he just can't pull the trigger.
His body completely recoils. He drops the gun in weak, saying, I can't do it myself, I am too weak.
He wants to die, but his biological survival instinct overrides his philosophical resolve.
Enter Masha, the Roma singer, who truly loves him. She sees him torturing himself, caught between his moral refusal to lie and his physical inability to die. And she proposes a brilliant, albeit deeply illegal alternative.
If the state only needs a body to grant the divorce, they will give the state a body.
They concoct a plan. Fedor will write a despairing, poetic farewell letter. He will leave his clothes, his pocketbook, and his identification on the bank of the freezing river, and he will simply disappear into the night.
And the plan works flawlessly. The Arabic dramatization is wonderfully grim about the details here. Weeks later, a body is pulled from the river.
It's bloated, unrecognizable, disfigured by the water and the fish.
Lisa is called to the morgue to identify it. She is deeply traumatized, already entirely convinced by the suicide note, and terrified of looking too closely. She takes one glance at the ruined face and says, yes, that's him.
Thus, the legal entity known as Fedor Protosov ceases to exist. He's issued a death certificate. He is buried in the ground. Meanwhile, the actual man wanders off with the Roma tribe. He has successfully become the living corpse.
Let's pause and really dissect the philosophical implication of that title, The Living Corpse.
To become a living corpse is to undergo a total social and legal death in order to preserve one's spiritual integrity. By the laws of man, he is a rotting body in a grave. But in his own soul, for the first time in his life, he is living authentically.
He has completely removed himself from the rigid, hypocritical societal chessboard.
Exactly. He has sacrificed his identity so that the good people, Lisa and Victor, can finally play by the rules without him polluting their game.
Okay, I'm going to push back on this heavily because it is very easy to dress this up in noble existential philosophy. We can call it a sacrifice for truth. We can frame him as a martyr.
But you're looking at the reality of his actions.
Right. Is faking your own death to avoid filling out divorce paperwork and facing a judge actually a noble sacrifice? Or is this just the ultimate extreme conflict avoidance strategy of a profound coward?
He didn't face the system.
No, he just ran away and let his wife deal with the absolute trauma of identifying a bloated stranger in a morgue.
And that is exactly the brilliant, uncomfortable tension Tolstoy wants you to wrestle with. Is Fedor a martyr, or is he a mouse? It's not a clean binary.
If we look closely at Fedor's own dialogue, he doesn't claim to be a hero, does he?
No, he freely admits his cowardice. He says to Masha, I'm just lost. I'm no good. But we have to view this through Tolstoy's philosophical framework. In Tolstoy's eyes, a society that demands a performative lie to grant freedom is fundamentally more corrupt than the weak man who runs from it.
So yes, Fedor's cowardice is a personal failing, but the law's corruption is systemic and total.
Precisely. Fedor refuses to feed the systemic corruption, even if his method of refusal is born out of his own pathetic weakness.
That's a fascinating distinction. It's like he knows he isn't a knight in shining armor. He's not strong enough to slay the dragon, so he just plays dead in the mud so the dragon will walk past him and leave the princess alone.
And the crazy thing is, it actually works. For a significant amount of time, the strategy is absolutely flawless.
Lisa and Victor get married. They move to the country. The dramatization highlights how peacefully they are living. They even have a child together. They are perfectly legally content.
It works perfectly, yes, until the harsh, unyielding reality of the legal system drags him back from the dead by his collar.
Right, because you can't outrun the bureaucracy forever. Years pass, and Fedor has fallen a long way from the romanticized musical life of wandering with the Roma. He is at rock bottom.
The broadcasts paint a profoundly grim picture. He is living in a dirty, poorly lit subterranean dive bar in Moscow. He is dressed in literal rags.
He is drinking the cheapest liquor available with a washed-up artist. And in a moment of drunken nostalgia, seeking a little bit of connection, he recounts the whole incredible story to his drinking buddy.
He explains how he faked his death and how his beautiful wife is now happily married to a good man.
A fatal mistake. Because he doesn't realize who is sitting at the next table, listening through the thin walls of the dive.
It's a professional blackmailer, a man the adaptations name Ivan, or Artemis. This man overhears the entire drunken confession.
And where Fedor sees a beautiful, peaceful resolution to a tragic love triangle, the blackmailer sees a massive, lucrative crime.
The blackmailer approaches Fedor and lays it out. He basically says, hey buddy, your wife isn't a widow, she's a bigamist. Give me her current address, we write her a threatening letter, and we can extort money out of this rich court chamberlain forever. If they don't pay, they go to prison.
And Fedor, the man who fled his entire life rather than tell a lie, absolutely explodes with righteous fury. He calls the man a dirty, blackmailing beast.
He refuses to participate in the extortion, threatens the man, and drives him off. He actually thinks he has protected Lisa once again, but the damage is completely irreversible.
Because the blackmailer doesn't need Fedor's permission. He just walks straight to the police station and reports the whole story. The living corpse has been officially spotted.
And this is where the real-world stakes come crashing down with terrifying force.
This plot point wasn't just a melodramatic invention by Tolstoy, was it?
Not at all. It is explicitly rooted in a true historical event from 1898 known as the Gypsy case. It was a massive, highly publicized scandal in Russia that completely consumed the courts and the press. Tolstoy was deeply familiar with it.
And the crucial element here is how the law interprets the situation.
Right. The law does not view Lisa as an innocent victim of a fake suicide who merely wanted to move on with her life. The law views Lisa strictly, categorically, and mercilessly as a bigamist.
And the stakes aren't just a fine or public embarrassment. If she is convicted of bigamy, what is the penalty?
The penalty is exile to Siberia.
Exile to Siberia. For finding happiness after a miserable marriage, her entire life, her new family, her freedom, everything she's built destroyed because she genuinely thought her husband was dead.
Yeah.
It is utterly astonishing.
And this sets the stage for what I believe is the most powerful, searing philosophical clash in the entire narrative. It is the interrogation scene. It is the ultimate showdown between Fedor and the investigating magistrate.
This scene is practically Tolstoy's definitive manifesto against the bureaucracy of justice. Fedor is hauled out of the slums and thrown into the magistrate's brightly lit office.
And the magistrate is sitting there behind his desk, comfortable, smug, wearing his uniform, casually leafing through his paperwork.
He begins interrogating Fedor, but he isn't asking about the human tragedy. He demands to know Fedor's name, his rank, his religion. He demands to know if Lisa secretly bribed him to fake his death so she could commit bigamy.
And the magistrate looks down his nose at this man in rags and says, "The law demands the truth."
And Fedor just loses it. The dam breaks. He delivers this searing monologue that is basically the thesis statement of the play. He screams at the magistrate, "What do you know about the truth?"
Fedor masterfully contrasts the deep, agonizing spiritual reality of his lived experience with the petty, unfeeling paperwork of the magistrate. He looks at this bureaucrat and says, "Your business is crawling up into a little power that you may use it by tantalizing morally and physically people 1,000 times better than you."
People 1,000 times better than you. He is looking right at the embodiment of the state, a man who has done absolutely nothing wrong on paper, and telling him that Victor and Lisa, who are technically felons by the letter of the law, are spiritually vastly superior to him.
Fedor tries to explain that the three of them were engaged in a profound, devastating spiritual struggle between anguish and peace, between falsehood and truth. They suffered, they sacrificed their own desires, and they finally managed to find a peaceful, loving resolution that hurt no one.
And then Fedor highlights the absolute grotesque absurdity of the justice system. He points out that when a bastard adventurer, the blackmailer, shows up at the police station with a filthy, malicious scheme to destroy a family for profit, the system doesn't punish the blackmailer.
No. The system, the grand defender of public justice, listens to the blackmailer, puts on its official uniform, and proceeds to systematically torture the good people.
I have an analogy for this magistrate, and I think everyone listening will relate to this feeling of profound helplessness.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are in the middle of a massive life or death crisis. A family member is severely ill, or your house just burned to the ground. You are desperate. You call the insurance company or the hospital administration line, and you are weeping into the phone, trying to explain the nuanced, terrifying reality of your human suffering, begging for help.
And on the other end of the line?
On the other end of the line is an automated customer service bot. And no matter how much you cry, the bot just responds in this cheerful, synthetic voice. "I'm sorry I didn't catch that. Please say billing or claims."
That is brilliant. It doesn't care about your suffering. It is structurally incapable of caring. It only understands its pre-programmed checkboxes.
That is Tolstoy's magistrate. The legal system only understands categories. Name, rank, religion, bigamy. It is completely intentionally deaf to human grace, to spiritual sacrifice, to complex reality.
That is exactly the frustration Fedor is expressing. He tells the magistrate that he sits and smiles in his complacent dignity while tearing apart lives he isn't even spiritually evolved enough to comprehend. The law, in Tolstoy's view, isn't a mechanism for justice. It is a blind machine that crushes the human spirit simply to maintain its own orderly filing system.
But the machine has been activated, and Fedor's yelling won't stop it. The paperwork has been filed. Fedor realizes with absolute horror that his fake death wasn't enough. The system demands a real victim.
The climax arrives in the form of a grand trial. And it is a public spectacle. The corridors of the courthouse are filled with gossiping crowds, aristocrats, and reporters, all treating this profound human tragedy like a piece of cheap theater.
And the options presented to the characters by their lawyers are absolutely devastating. It is a lose-lose-lose scenario.
Right, let's walk through the options. At worst, Lisa and Victor are found guilty of premeditated fraud and bigamy. If that happens, they are both exiled to the frozen wastelands of Siberia. Their lives are over.
And the best-case scenario offered by the state.
The best case is what the court calls a religious pardon. The judges might decide that Lisa didn't act with explicit malice, so they spare her from Siberia.
But in order to maintain the absolute sanctity of the marriage laws, her current happy marriage to Victor is immediately annulled. Her child is declared illegitimate.
And she is legally bound back to Fedor. She's forced by the state to return to a marriage with a destitute alcoholic man she thought was dead, tearing her away from the family she built.
The law offers absolutely no loophole for compassion. The law demands that the files be put back in their correct folders, regardless of how much blood is spilled to do it.
So Fedor makes his final, definitive move. He realizes that as long as he is breathing, as long as his heart is beating, the machine will hunt them. The only way to stop the relentless march of the paperwork is to finally provide the bureaucracy with the one thing it cannot argue with: a real corpse.
The climax plays out with incredible power. We need to slow down here and really look at what happens. In the English broadcast, we hear the chaos outside the courtroom. Fedor, standing in the corridor, finally finds the absolute nerve that he lacked by the river all those years ago.
He pulls out a revolver, places it to his chest, and pulls the trigger.
It's a shocking, violent end to the bureaucratic nightmare. But the Arabic dramatization adds this incredibly vivid Gothic detail to his final moments that I think seals the philosophical weight of the play.
Oh, the declaration.
Yes. As Fedor lays dying on the floor of the courthouse, bleeding out, he asks for a piece of paper. He writes a final, legally binding declaration of the absolute validity of Lisa and Victor's marriage, and he writes it using his own blood.
It is the ultimate, undeniable proof of his commitment. You want documentation,
Right.
You want physical evidence for your files, here is my blood. The cold ink of the bureaucratic state is literally replaced by the vital, warm fluid of a human sacrifice. He pays the ultimate tax.
It is such a haunting image. But I want to focus on Fedor's dying words, which are captured beautifully in the English broadcast. Lisa runs out of the courtroom, she falls to her knees beside him, weeping, and she asks him why he did it. Why did he shoot himself?
And Fedor, struggling for breath, gasps out, "Not for you, but for myself."
Not for you, but for myself. That line is the key to unlocking the entire deep dive. It is the core philosophical takeaway. Why, after sacrificing his life to save her from Siberia, does he specify that he is doing it for himself?
Because Fedor's redemption is entirely, fundamentally internal.
Right. It's not a rescue mission, even though that is the practical result. He didn't just die to save the damsel.
Exactly. Think back to the beginning of his journey. For his entire life, Fedor's tragedy was that agonizing gap between what he felt and what he could do. He felt the high ideals of truth and love, but he lived in the gutter of avoidance and lies.
He wanted to be a good man, but he lived a life of drunken cowardice.
In this final, brutal, bloody moment on the courthouse floor, he finally bridges that gap. He aligns his physical action completely with his spiritual ideal. He executes the ultimate truth. By destroying his physical self, he finalizes and secures his spiritual integrity.
So I have to ask you, the listener, to consider the title of the play again, Redemption. Did Fedor actually redeem himself? Or did he just let a broken, tyrannical society win?
Because on one hand, society got exactly what it demanded. The messy outlier is dead, the paperwork is resolved, the machine keeps humming.
But on the other hand,
within Tolstoy's strict existential framework, destroying the physical self in order to preserve love, truth, and the happiness of others is the ultimate victory over a false world.
the bureaucratic world wanted him to lie in court. He refused.
The world wanted to destroy innocent people to maintain its rules.
Yeah.
He took the bullet instead. He didn't let society win, he transcended its jurisdiction entirely. This smug magistrate behind the desk has absolutely no power over a ghost.
Wow. Let's recap this incredible journey we've just been on, because we have covered a massive amount of philosophical ground today. We started with Leo Tolstoy's own radical awakening.
The traumatic imagery of the freezing coachman, the theological hypocrisy of the Crimean War, the cold mechanics of the guillotine.
All of which forged his absolute, unyielding demand for the brutal truth. We then followed that demand into the deeply flawed character of Fedor Protasov, a man completely paralyzed by his inability to live up to his own ideals.
We explored the tragedy of the flat champagne marriage, a life that is perfect on paper but spiritually dead. And we wrestled with the dark, counterintuitive psychological reality that we often grow to hate the people we harm, simply to protect our own fragile egos.
We watched Fedor refuse to act out the degrading comedy of a legally mandated lie, choosing instead to fake his death and become a living corpse. And finally, we saw that attempt at social death violently collide with the unfeeling automated machinery of the law,
forcing Fedor to make the ultimate bloody sacrifice just to bridge the gap between his actions and his soul.
It is a relentless, uncompromising look at what it actually costs to be an authentic human being in a world that is structurally built on performance and compliance.
Which brings us back to you, the listener, because Tolstoy didn't write this just to tell a sad story about 19th century Russia. He wrote it as a mirror.
Where in your life are you living on flat champagne? Are there areas, relationships, or career paths where everything looks perfect on paper, you've checked all the right boxes, but the day-to-day reality feels stale, gray, and joyless?
Are there areas where you are conforming to societal expectations or administrative rules or family pressures that feel deeply, fundamentally dishonest to your own soul?
Are you participating in your own version of a degrading comedy just to keep the peace and avoid the messy truth?
That's a heavy question.
It really is. And I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If Fedor Protasov had truly been a bad, selfish, malicious person, this entire tragedy would never have happened.
Think about it. A truly bad person would have just paid off the sex workers, lied on the divorce papers, satisfied the smug magistrate, and gone on with his comfortable life without losing a single wink of sleep.
His tragedy wasn't that he was a monster. His tragedy was that he cared far too much about the truth to compromise with a society that only runs smoothly when people agree to lie.
What if the most dangerous, the most disruptive, the most profoundly revolutionary thing a person can do in a polite society is simply to refuse to tell a lie?
Think about the X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. We desperately want the world to be clean, binary, and easy to diagnose. The institutions we build, the law, the courts, polite society, corporate bureaucracy, they are the X-ray machine.
They look at the messy, bleeding, complicated reality of human life, and they try to force it into a clean, black and white picture.
But as Tolstoy so brilliantly and brutally shows us, that machine is broken. It cannot process the human soul.
And maybe the only cure for a broken machine isn't a better form to fill out or a new set of checkboxes.
Maybe the only cure is the plain, unvarnished, brutal truth, even if it costs you everything.